Hey there guys, gals, and non-binary pals, it's DMG and welcome back to Blitz. Today we are going to go over another Back to Basics video, this time on the map Mines. Now Mines has been a map that has been changed for, what? I don't know. How many updates? It's been changed 3 or 4 times I believe, with major changes being to the hill area and the cap circle being moved from the middle all the way out to a corner. But regardless, Mines is an interesting map because there's no such thing as supremacy on it. So it's only encounter. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, this is one of the maps that favors tank destroyers. Usually. Now there is an offensive and a defensive spawn to Mines, and I will explain the differences of that. So this side right here is the defensive spawn, while the north spawn is the offensive spawn. Why do I think that? Well, look at the raised area in the back, right? This is the defensive spawn in Mines, because if you have a large amount of tank destroyers, you can easily sit back here and defend the hill easily. However, let's say if we go to the other side, there's only that one raised location, and at an absolute maximum, you can only have 2 tank destroyers on the backs on the other side here, right? Because there's 2 bushes only, and they don't give you a lot of view range. Or just, there's not a lot of room to spread out, right? And there's not a lot of lanes to fire from. I mean, you have this area here with this bush here, this bush back here, if you want some more cover, right? But then again, you're not seeing as far up the hill. And you can even go into these bushes back here. But regardless, it's not as wide of an area as the south spawn. So the amount of tank destroyers that can realistically sit back here and not get clogged and not be firing into the same lanes and still being effective is 2, in my opinion. However, all the way back there, you can sit 3 to 4 tank destroyers and have them all be effective. Now, while I do think 4 tank destroyers may be a little bit excessive, 3 works perfectly fine, and you can easily defend because of the bushes, right? You have one bush right there, another bush right there. These are really common tank destroyer spots, and you got that enormous rock right there which you can hide behind. You even have bushes all the way on this side which allow you to overlook the cap circle, whereas on the other side you do not have access to the same views on the cap. So if we go over here, you see this bush right here, and this allows you to look into the cap, and it provides some hard cover. This is perfect for like an Object 268 or a Waffle or anything that has decent camo, right? Because this allows you to rain down fire with decent hard cover, right? So I hope you understand that, right? The differences between these 2 spawns. It's not as cut and dried as it looks. There's one side I feel much more comfortable being aggressive on, or not comfortable, but where you have to be more aggressive, and the other where you can just sit back, let the game develop, and play from there. Now, the important thing to know about Mines is that hill is still important. However, this part of the hill is not important. Or I wouldn't say not important, but not as important, because let's say you get up here, right? And it is good if you can take up here in a very quick medium tank, let's say a Leopard 1 or a light tank that has some armor, like a T-54 lightweight or an LTTB like I'm driving, right? So that's good if you can get up here, right? But it opens you up to tank destroyer fire. And another important thing here of a way to differentiate the spawns is that there's more cover looking out into this spawn than there is looking out into the north spawn, right? So I can poke around here, get easy shots, you know, put my tank flat on with this and point my gun down and shoot at all the people that are sitting there, right? Granted, the LTTB doesn't have the best amount of gun depression, but you see my point, right? However, on this side, if you come out over here, there's not as much cover here, and it opens you up to shots from people sitting in that bush there, the bush right there, and even people sitting all the way back around in this area camping, right? So there's just so many different ways you can get shot at, but then again, keep in mind you have to attack. Well, not have to, but it is highly advisable to attack on the north spawn of Mines, whereas on the south spawn of Mines, it's advisable to defend and just sit and camp. Just because of the nature of the terrain, right? And I really hope that gets into your head, because people always think it's all about the hill. Everyone has an equal chance at the hill. No, wrong. Everyone does not have an equal chance at the hill. But this area is still key, right? It's still important. But it's not as key as it used to be, when you could get up here and just absolutely dominate everything in sight. And tank destroyers would have a tough time hitting you because there weren't any good tank destroyer locations. But now, with tank destroyers playing a much heavier role on this map and being able to kind of control the hill in a passive manner, there is a less emphasized portion of that top hill. Now, the important part of the hill, this is where you want to take your heavy tanks. Or, actually, I'll say this. When the game first starts, and if you don't feel comfortable going to the hill, right, sit here, go to the bush. This is mirrored on both sides. Wait for people to cross and pop them one in the drive wheel. If you can pop them one in the drive wheel, track them for at least 1.5 seconds, your tank destroyers will get a bead on the enemy and fire away into sides. Usually this will be on extremely light tanks because, right, they're going to be coming up here first trying to get to the hill. You won't see an E100 trying to crest unless they're really, really dumb, right, or an IS-7 coming all the way across, because then they're going to get spotted, shot at by tank destroyers, and killed. But this allows you to get early spots and early shot across. They won't see you originally. You'll have some nice silhouette cover, so most likely, unless they have perfectly good OP PC auto aim, right, they're not going to hit you or see you until it's too late. So this is a really good spot to originally reset from, or just track somebody and get an early kill. I've seen people push from this rock right here, go all the way up, or at least try, get tracked from someone sitting right here, which is usually me, and then the tank destroyers finish off the job, or fast heavy tanks that come up here and are able to put in a shot. Another important thing that you can do with heavy tanks, or any tank that has a strong armor profile, is put it here. This is on both sides as well. Now what this allows you to do is dominate people trying to poke up on the hill, right? And it gives you a nice little side scraping spot. You can also poke like this, and while it's not the safest thing, it's a lot safer than trying to crest the ridge straight like this. If you can poke out your side, or just poke out your drive wheel just a little bit, you're not too exposed. I mean, yeah, you can be hit, but it's such a small target right there, correct? And overall, it's a much safer way to engage the hill or play the hill than just trying to crest it all the time, looking for good shots. And you still can crest if you have good gun depression, right? And I'll showcase that here. Now, there's all kinds of positions you can take on the hill, more so on the south, not the south side, more so on the north side than on the south side. But I will go over that. And this is actually kind of a counter to having better tank destroyer locations, is that the south side has better heavy tank not the south side, the north side has better heavy tank locations, right? So something you have here, right, as you can see, first of all, just to make that clear, there's this bush right here which you can reset people from, the one I was just aiming at. And also there's here, right? Now this is where you want to take your heavy tanks, put them here, allows you to catch people trying to poke over, right? You can also poke like this, spray from your turret here. This is great for an IS-7, even, or a T-34. You know, this is good for a lot of different kinds of tanks. And you can even poke all the way up here, have shots at people trying to sit behind the bush, looking at people trying to cross and get up, right? And then the last position that you can take, oh wait, a quick note about this position, right, is if this position is good, but you have to be very careful about who's flanking you on the lighthouse side. So if people start coming here, it's not as workable, right? You can't poke all the way back here and really go for long side scrapes. You have to stay in the corner essentially, and it becomes a little bit more difficult to work, which then means you're forced to poke like this, which is your drive wheel. But if there's no one flanking you, by all means, this is a great spot to use. You just have to be very aware and prioritize flankers that try and come all the way around here to shoot. So keep that in mind when you're playing this spot. Now, the last spot I can show you that is workable or reflectable on both sides is right here. This is the classic mine spot for heavy tanks. You can poke here, get shots, although it's albeit really hard. But the main thing about this spot is that you can poke this way, granted that nobody is there trying to fire at you, but even though you can be like right here and it'll be extremely hard, but you can just poke your turret like this, poke your hull on your turret, and most lights and mediums won't engage you if you're in a heavy tank and you're just poking your turret like this. And you're pretty safe. Well, I mean, the only thing that can hit you are the lights and mediums that would dare poke on you, and then you're going for, what, 400 for 300, which is in your favor if you're, like, say, an E100, 640 for 310, something like that, but you get my point. And it's hard to hit you because the tank destroyers have a difficult time getting a bead on you. And, of course, you can always side scrape out like this. This is kind of dangerous, but it opens you up to fire, but at the same time, it does allow you to get some really cheeky shots. My first advice is actually just to wait. Sit and wait. People like to get greedy. Heavy tanks like to get greedy and side scrape. They'll usually angle wrong, or they will just try and poke their drive wheel out like this, trying to get around and get shots. You can do this sometimes, but once again, I will say this is at your own risk, right? Because once you poke your drive wheel, you are liable to get tracked and killed. So keep that in mind. However, if you're aware of who has fired and who has not, right, poking out, getting a quick shot, and pulling back is sometimes your best option and is advisable. However, like I said, you have to be aware, and it is at your own risk. Now, the only spot that I really enjoy playing on heavy tanks when on the north spawn, especially if you're in a tall heavy tank, and this is the way the terrain works. And here's a secret spot that I use all the time in my low. It's to go like this. There's a small... See this small gap in this rock formation right here? You can poke a really high, heavy tank. Let's say a low, right? And you can see, I can barely see over it right here. But if you're in a low, right, who has good turret and good hull, you can easily poke over this, use your gun depression, spot all the tank destroyers, and just go to town on them. And essentially, you're just this impenetrable spotting mechanic, and it is so hard to pen you back if you keep wiggling back and forth. People will just be trying to figure out a way to break your position. Sometimes they will even try and poke out and try and get your side, and yeah, they'll poke around the corner, and yes, they may hit, but also keep in mind that they're opening themselves up to the tank destroyer and all the people sitting behind here ready to fire at them. Because remember, poking over straight is an awful idea, because let's say you're sitting all the way over here, right? If I'm a low, I can't, it is really hard for me to get a shot. Or if you're a low over there, it's hard for me to get a shot. You have to have good penetration. And most likely what's going to happen is, if I'm right here, I'll turn my armor like this. I'll angle the armor like this. So even if you poke, my armor will be angled, and all you have is side. I just have to be aware of, you know, when you poke and having my turret turned at the right time, and of course not having my turret turned like this when I'm sitting right here also get penned, but having it turned like this, being able to bounce shots. But usually it's hard for people to think of all these angles in public matches, so I'll just take like a low right here, an E100, something like that. Granted, I haven't played the E100 in a public battle yet, but regardless, take a big, strong, heavy tank here that has decent amounts of gun depression, and you will find results. Tiger 2s even work here, although they don't have the strongest of turrets. T-34s, T-32s, M103s to a lesser degree, but they still work. ST-1s work there, E-75s. Stuff like that is what you're going to want to play. So that's essentially the heavy part of mines, right? And although it's quite a small map, it's quite intricate, which is what I love. So I've showed you all of these spots over around the hill area. I've showed you the different places you can go. Oh, I don't think I have. So essentially what you can do is you rush up here, right, if you're in a really fast tank, and you go to the other side. So this way, what this means is that in order for the enemy team, right, let's say if they are coming from the south side, they have to poke their turrets all the way around to shoot me, which opens them up to fire from all the heavy tanks sitting in here, right? You don't want to be over here, because then you are liable to get shot, right? So keep that in mind. You don't want to be like this unless you're in a, let's say, a Patton that has a really strong turret and a decently strong hull and good gun depression. But keep in mind, those tanks are few and far between, so that's not always going to happen. And to say that a Patton's going to get up there at the start of the game is quite a difficult ask. Mines is so intricate because now we haven't even discussed like the sides of the map. And while they aren't the most important parts to take, they can play some use for really quick flanks. But that's the hill essentially. Push across to the other side if you happen to get up to the hill, right? In terms of what berm you're going to abuse, like if I'm coming from this side, don't go like this. Go right across. There is no time for you to turn and drive because that opens up your butt to all the lights and mediums that could be rushing hill, or the heavy tanks that could be rushing hill, or the lights and mediums that spot you, and the tank destroyers that are going to whoop your ass if you turn and drive over here, right? So if I'm coming from the south spawn, I immediately want to go up that hill and drive like this, and then turn my tank once I'm safe, and then abuse the ridge like that. If we have that down, I can finally go over the other parts of this map. Now, let's go over the lighthouse side first. The south side is better than the north side. Oh my gosh, the south side is better than the light side. Ugh, where are my words today? But why is the south side better? You have better shots into the hill area, and what I mean by that is you can sit back in this area and put shots at people who are trying to abuse this hill, people that poke out. You know, sometimes they'll poke their drive wheel and you'll be able to put shots. This is great for like your Leopard 1s, your Object 140s, T62A now especially because of the uber accurate gun, right? So that's a possible spot to use. You can also go around here, right, in this bush if you have good camouflage, and fire away as well. Now, how do you flank? Flanking is such a difficult task on mines because if you flank, right, the heavy tanks right here that have a viewport or a view range lane on you will be able to spot you and shoot you. So flanking like this is not necessarily a good idea. I rarely ever push all the way across, and I find that when I do, I die. And then when other people do it, they die. When I find the enemy team that does it, regardless of what side they are on, they will die. So pushing all the way across should not be a opening game maneuver for you. A long aggressive flank should not be an opening hand for mines, regardless of what spawn you're on. This big rock is as far as you want to go. Past this rock, this is the point of, past this rock, this is the point of no return. So keep that in mind. Now, on the other side, those sniping spots for the Leo are not, or your Object 140s and stuff like that are not as available. There's not as many good locations. You can't abuse this area as much, right? If you have this bush right here, right, it's not the same. It's not the same. You can't reset from these bushes like you can, or counter the hill like you can from these bushes like you can on the south side. So the south side does, like I said, it just has more campy locations. So how do you flank, right? It's hard, but that's why the hill is so important, because in a poor effort to flank, or just poor attempts at flanking, right? The most I'd send anyone out here is one person, right? More than one person out here is a waste of resources, right? And coming from this side, you know, you'll be able to see the tank destroyers, but once they spot you, man, you are in dire straits. So yes, what you can do is sometimes, right, at your own risk, you can push all the way across if you're on the north side and come to this location, because then the tank destroyers will have a difficult time hitting you. Of course, then again, there's tank destroyers usually right there, so it may not be the best idea. But in the event that tank destroyers are not looking at you and you can get over here, like I said, at your own risk, but you can flank like this and put shots up and across at heavy tanks that are abusing this hill area. However, once you are here, keep in mind, or I'll say, if you push aggressively all the way across, right, once you get over here, you are stuck over here. So not always the best move to make. Now that I've pretty much discussed the lighthouse side, it's not the best way to go, but can be effective in certain situations. Now, the cap side. This cap is probably one of the best ways to draw people out, although you don't have clear shots at anybody. Now, I remember in a ratings battle, I played, I think it was an IS-7 or an E1, or I played the YAG, actually. That's what it was. I was playing the YAG. And it was a stalemate, and we were losing, right? And I just said, shit, we got to do something, because they're just gonna out camp us, because we had the north spawn and they had the south spawn. So I just went in the cap and sat, and I just sat right behind here, waited for the IS-7s. Once they came, I put my 800 alpha gun to work and had my tank destroyers help me, and we ended up winning. And even though I died in the process, what happens is if you start capping, right, enemy heavy tanks have to come all the way around and leave the hill. Enemy medium tanks either have to flank all the way around through tank destroyers or come back all the way around. So it's essentially a very passive move to clear space. Does that make sense when I say that? So I'll try explaining that again. So if I go in the cap, right, I essentially, it's like chess. I put the enemy in check. Now, when in check, they have to make a move to reset the cap. And sure, they don't have to do it right away, but they eventually start moving around. Heavy tanks have to rotate. Lights and mediums have to rotate. Tank destroyers might have to leave their campy spots if the hill is fully engaged, and heavy tanks cannot afford to commit any resources to the cap area, right? So what that means is they have to engage you. And this is so tactical, because once you're in this cap and they move, that means your team has clear opportunities to push. You should just be sitting in this cap. Sometimes it is the right move, and sometimes you dying and having a bunch of tanks try and clobber you is the best scenario in this situation. I mean, I've done this before, and yeah, it's kind of a gritty demise, but it draws people away and it allows your team to win the game. Now, on the north side, I do believe the cap circle location is better, because you can sit back here. So there are a few counters, right? There's that heavy tank location, and there's this cap circle. On the north, if you're coming from the south side, right, these buildings aren't as good, because tank destroyers can easily look through those lanes and penetrate you. But with the north side, you have more cover with those buildings just to kind of sit and wait, right? So the cap can be used as a very strategic way to draw out the enemy, or make tanks rotate around enough, right? Because sometimes all it takes is for one AMX 50B to leave the hill, or one E100, or one IS-7, or one IS-4 to leave the hill, to give your team the numbers advantage to push over and across to focus fire situation, right? And sometimes it'll make tank destroyers leave, right? Sometimes tank destroyers will rotate from one side, or especially from the south spawn, they'll rotate from that side to this side to have eyes on any cap movement that a heavy tank will spot, which could give your team enough time to push through and kill. So capping can be a very, very profitable maneuver. Now, like I said, keep in mind, the biggest thing you need to remember is that Mines has two different spawns. This one, the south spawn, is defensive, and the north spawn is offensive. There are two ways to make the north spawn work. It is using the cap to your advantage, which should not be your first option, and also using various hill locations, especially the one if you're in a heavy tank, right? By going up here and abusing this. This is available only on this side. So keep that in mind. But those are the really important things you need to remember about Mines. I hope you enjoyed that content. Mines, despite being a small map, is extremely complex in my opinion. Supremacy would just be really clustered, and I don't think it would work very well on it. But if you enjoyed that content, please hit that like button and subscribe. And if you didn't, please leave your constructive criticism in the comment section on how I can make my map guides better. As always, I appreciate the opportunity to share my passion with you today, and I hope to see you next time.